name's Tim Abbott. I work in Colchester, team leader of a whole bunch of chaplains working in schools all the way across the Colchester area. And then also helping us out today, we have Ruben.
I'm Ruben. I'm part of the Youthscape team in Luton.
So Ruben's going to be watching the chat for us and just picking up any questions and stuff, and then also helping me out today. We've got...
Hi, welcome to Littlehampton. My name is Paul Sanderson. I've been the chaplain here at the Littlehampton Academy for 11 years. I also started last September chaplain at the Robert Woodard Academy on the sunny south coast. Look forward to meeting you all later.
So it's over to Josh. So welcome to this seminar about chaplaincy and to Josh Hunt. So Josh, where do you work? What do you do? Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello. Yeah, I'm from Ipswich, but I work at a fantastic school called Felixstowe School on the beautiful Suffolk coast.
Yeah. And how long have you been there?
I've been there for just over 6 years now.
Yeah. And what's your role at the school?
So I'm called chaplain. I'm full-time chaplain at the school, and the role has been created and is funded by a little charity called Boost, which is supported by churches and individuals across Felixstowe and beyond. And Boost exists to pioneer partnerships between faith and education, and we primarily do that through our chaplaincy partnership at Felixstowe School.
Right. So, and what we're going to chat about today comes out of some research you've been doing. So, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to always be surrounded by people who have championed kind of CPD and continued research. And so about 5 years ago, I started a PhD specifically looking at what makes chaplaincy so distinctive within schools, particularly with regard to having input into school culture and school ethos. So they're quite kind of big conceptual problems, but I really felt that as chaplaincy expands into so many different types of schools across the UK, we needed just a little bit more research to really show how distinctive chaplaincy can be and the fantastic impact it can make to both students and to staff as well.
Right. We're really looking forward to you. I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Josh.
Well, hello, it's really good to see you, and hopefully you're here today because in some capacity you're involved with chaplaincy, schools-based youth work or schools-based ministry. So welcome. My name is Josh and I've been the full-time chaplain at Felixstowe School for 6 years. And Felixstowe School is a fantastic high school and sixth form without religious character on the beautiful Suffolk coast. And my role here is possible because of this fantastic local charity called Boost, which exists to pioneer partnerships between faith and education. And our chaplaincy at Felixstowe School is defined by 3 threads, and they are awe and wonder, justice and activism, and wholeness and inclusion. And those threads permeate all of the work and the projects and initiatives that we're involved with through our chaplaincy. I've also spent the past 5 years researching different aspects of high school chaplaincy to hopefully complete a PhD in the next few months. So that's a little bit about the context that I'm speaking from today. But the theme of this conference is about new hope, and if there's anyone who can be and bring hope to schools, I believe it to be you fine people who are here today through the powerful and often underappreciated ministry of school chaplaincy. So I'd like to start by asking you to think about your role in your school at the moment. Because typically when I meet chaplains and when I ask about what they do, they describe one of 2 things. Some chaplains instantly gravitate towards some of the individual, personal interactions that they have day to day. So for example, those of us who fit into that camp will often talk about the mentoring that we do, maybe specific students that we're supporting, or perhaps even small groups of young people that we work with quite regularly. But some chaplains, on the other hand, they instantly gravitate towards describing some of their whole school activities. And so those of us who fit into that camp, when people ask us what we do, we typically first talk about assemblies, we might talk about collective worship, we might talk about whole school charity events, You know, the kind of things that see us supporting the whole school community. Now, these two aspects of our work, the individual and the collective, they're not mutually exclusive at all, but typically chaplains lean towards one rather than the other, and actually both support each other. Now, perhaps our work has shifted somewhat. It's likely that any involvement we had with assemblies or with collective worship have either been reduced or paused or even removed in some cases. And whole school events are not quite the same, that's if they're happening at all. And you may feel that the balance of your work between individual and collective support has shifted somewhat towards the individual in these times. But today, I'd like to share some insight into the distinctiveness of chaplaincy that allows us to bring hope to both aspects of our role. To individuals, yes, but also to the collective of our whole school community. And my aim is that what I'm sharing today will both encourage you and empower you in the hope that you will bring to your school context. But what do we mean by hope? Let's define that first of all. Well, a number of times over lockdown, I was asked to do little videos or thoughts for the day about hope and what it means to me. And my answer was the same every time. I think hope for us as chaplains has to operate on a number of different levels. I think it has to operate on quite a superficial level of bringing a smile and a cheerful mood when appropriate. Sometimes that's just what our schools need. But I think it also has to operate on a much deeper level, that our situation can change and it can be transformed for the better. And I find hope in Scripture when I read about a place called the Valley of Achor in the Old Testament. The Valley of Achor is a place that we first hear about in Joshua chapter 7. And in this story, there's a man called Achan, and he's committed a great sin. And he's led into the Valley of Achor, this place where he's confronted by Joshua. It says in verse 24 of chapter 7, the book of Joshua, that Joshua, together with all of Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys and sheep, his tent and all that he had, to this place, the Valley of Achor. And Joshua said, "Why have you brought this trouble upon us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Now this story didn't end well for Achan, because the next verse says that all of Israel stoned him, and after they'd stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. It ends with, "Therefore, that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since." Valley of Achor translates to mean the Valley of Trouble. Because of this terrible event that had taken place, it's almost like this area has been labelled as being a place of trouble forevermore. So much so that the Israelites built this pile of stones, this monument to the Valley of Trouble. And it almost seems certain that it will be like this forevermore. But we hear about the Valley of Achor in two other places in Scripture. Firstly in Isaiah chapter 65, where it says the Valley of Achor will become a resting place for the herds, for my people who seek me. And secondly, in the book of Hosea chapter 2, verse 15, where God says that I will make the Valley of Achor a door of hope. And that's the kind of hope that I believe in. That's the kind of hope I believe that we should resonate as chaplains. It's a deep and transformative hope that God can change things for the better, and that he can make these places of trouble and of despair become doorways of hope. Now, you might be sat at your computer today thinking, well, Josh, that's probably a bit too much of a task for me in my small chaplaincy role that I have in my local school. Well, I'd like to share with you some quotes about chaplains and the impact that they have on their entire school communities, and you might be persuaded otherwise. This first quote is from a head teacher. They say, "My worst nightmare is is if the funding for chaplaincy ran out. I'm not sure what I'd do. I'm not sure what the school would do. It's crucial to the school community. I don't know how you're viewed as a chaplain in your school. I don't know how your friends and family view chaplaincy. Some people can equate it to kind of like a counsellor, kind of like just a nice person that comes into school quite regularly. We just need to take one look at that quote from a head teacher to realise that there's something about chaplaincy that goes beyond just being a nice person. There's something that goes beyond just providing a bit of support to some individuals. This head teacher points to the fact that chaplaincy is crucial to the school community. Let's take a look at another couple of quotes. The chaplain here is described as the public face of God and the executive face of a school's distinctive Christian ethos. Now, both of these phrases come from a Church of England research report into chaplaincy, and the report is called The Public Face of God. I'd strongly encourage you to go and read it if you haven't already. It's fantastic. But if I asked you to show me your badge, your ID badge for your school, it would likely have the name of your school, it would have your name, it might have a photo. I wonder whether underneath your name it would say the public face of God. I wonder whether under your name it would say the executive face of a school's distinctive Christian ethos. Well, mine doesn't, and I'm guessing that yours doesn't either. We don't tend to view our roles as being at this level of depth or having this much impact into a school community. But these are quotes from students and staff on how chaplaincy is perceived in schools. And let's not think that these comments are for other chaplains. You know, the chaplains who are ordained, the chaplains who are in very well-established Church of England schools, you know, the chaplains who have their own chapel. As wonderful as that is, this report wasn't solely about that kind of chaplaincy, because this report encompassed a number of chaplains from a range of contexts and perspectives, and a significant number that took part in this research were lay chaplains. They were volunteer chaplains, many of which did only 3 or 4 hours per week, and yet they're still described as being the public face of God, the executive face of a school's distinctive Christian ethos. It's interesting, isn't it? A couple more quotes here from students and staff, that the chaplain is the heart of the school, the soul of the school, and school is a different place when you're here. Let's think about that last one again. The school is a different place when you're here. Let's think back to the Valley of Acre. It's almost like when the chaplain is in the school, the place becomes different. It feels like a different place when the chaplain is here. That's the kind of hope that we're talking about. And these are all quotes that I've just picked up along the way from students and staff and from research reports available online. But all of these quotes, and many others too, they allude to our work in a much wider context than our individual encounters with young people. They allude to an impact that's much bigger than we probably routinely recognise. And so much of the research into school chaplaincy contains fragments of language that hint of chaplains having more impact than the sum of our parts. So today, even if you tend to view your work primarily as focused on one-to-one support, and even if you think you have a relatively small impact in your school community, I would like you to intentionally recognise your impact and your role as about being and bringing hope to individuals, but also to the wider context of the whole school community, collectively. And with that, I'd love to share with you 5 distinctive elements of chaplaincy that I've distilled over the years through my own practice, through conversations with the chaplains, through visits to other schools, and including some of the literature and research on chaplaincy that really enable us to bring this hope to our school communities in a way that is unlike any other role in the school. And these 5 distinctive elements of chaplaincy will hopefully resonate with you and encourage you and empower you in your work and ministry. So let's look at these 5. The first is that chaplaincy is distinctive because it provides safe impartiality. Let's reflect on that for a moment. there are some groups out there who perceive chaplaincy as being a kind of religious infiltration into a secular education system. And no doubt we'll all have a view on how that relationship between church and state and education should play out. But after speaking to a number of chaplains and visiting a number of schools, my experience has shown that chaplaincy actually offers a sense of impartiality, which students really struggle to find in other areas of the school. Particularly for students struggling with big questions, struggling with their own faith, struggling with sexuality and gender identity. Students and staff tended to view the chaplain as someone who was impartial, someone who was safe to go to with ideas, with questions, with frustrations, as someone who wouldn't judge and as someone who wouldn't discriminate. And you will know this if you have ever had a student, for example, tell you they think they might be LGBT or T before the student has even told their own parents. I mean, that's a very specific example, but more generally, I always wonder why students disclose things to the chaplains that they might not have told any other member of staff or any other member of their family. And sometimes students will even say things to us that they haven't processed themselves. I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with a student, or a member of staff in fact, where they've said something and almost been surprised that those words have come out of their mouths. It's super interesting, isn't it? So many people question chaplaincy thinking that it's imposing particular viewpoints or religious beliefs onto vulnerable young people, when actually much of my experience is the exact opposite. That chaplaincy offered this neutral, impartial, safe place or holy ground where young people struggle to find that elsewhere, a safe place where they had the freedom to process everything they were experiencing at school and at home. And this leads straight into the second area of distinctiveness about chaplaincy, that chaplaincy offers a distinctive relationship. It may seem fairly obvious, but there was something distinctive about the relationship with the chaplain compared to other members of staff. And interestingly, I've found this is fairly consistent, regardless of how the chaplain is labelled or how the chaplaincy is set up. Because even amongst us today, I'm sure there will be significant variation. Some chaplains are called chaplains. Obviously, that's the kind of wisdom you come to these seminars for, isn't it? Some chaplains are called chaplains, thank you. Some chaplains are not called chaplains, they're called something else. Some chaplains make a big deal that they're not a member of staff, and other chaplains are member of staff, sometimes with quite significant responsibilities across the school. Some of us have our own chapel, some of us have our own meeting rooms or offices, some of us are nomadic, we have no place to rest our head. But regardless of all of that variation, students and staff routinely detect something different about the relationship with the chaplain in contrast to other adults at school. And when I visit schools and I ask why, students typically comment, it's just different with the chaplain. And as someone who's curious about these kind of things and someone who's trying to research that, it's not that helpful when a student says it's just different. But here's things that I have heard students say about their chaplains. He's part of my whole life, not just my school life. That's something I've heard from a student in the past, that the chaplain wasn't just interested in a segment of their life, but in their whole life. And that is so crucial as we reconnect with students, as we listen to their stories from the past 6 months, and as we help them find hope in the darkness. The idea that we offer a distinctive relationship which cares about the whole lives of young people is more important now than ever before. The third area of distinctiveness of chaplaincy is that we can deliver an outrageous peacefulness. I appreciate you might not feel like you offer this right now. I spent most of the past 4 to 5 months at home with my family as we were shielding. We were part of that vulnerable group. And so returning to school and returning to that routine, not only with my own work but with my own kids, it's not an experience where the word peaceful immediately sprang to mind. But my own experience of visiting other chaplains over the past few years is that chaplains were perceived as being relaxed, calm, peaceful, not rushed, even in really difficult, stressful circumstances. And that is hugely powerful because within school, that can be very countercultural. Schools are typically very busy, they're quite rushed, and there's something so radical about a chaplain saying, I'm here, have some of my time. No cost, no conditions. When someone walks past and says, oh, have you got a minute? And you say, yes. That's so empowering. That calm, restful, unrushed peacefulness is a breath of fresh air. It's a breath of fresh hope for schools that are so often running fast to stand still. And it's distinctive to chaplaincy. The fourth area of distinctiveness of chaplaincy is that we can hold bold authority. But this was not necessarily authority from the school. As an example, with a number of chaplaincies I visited, the chaplain was perceived to be one of the top 3 people who had the most authority with regard to setting the tone of the culture and embedding the ethos of the school. And that's the perspective of staff and students. Now this is super interesting because if I was to ask you if you had any authority in your school, I wonder what your answer would be, because some of you might say yes, others of you might say no. And I wonder whether there's a difference there between those of us who are teaching members of staff and those of us who are support members of staff, and maybe between those of us who are part of the staff body and those of us who are funded and provided for externally. But I found that students and staff repeatedly recognised that the chaplain, although not always staff, although not always a teacher, although not always a priest, they still had authority in some capacity. When people see you, they say, this is someone who sets the tone. This is the person I want to spend time with. This is the person I want to share my life with. This is someone who commands authority in some capacity. And in the context in which we find ourselves, the authority to embody hope in strange times. The fifth and final distinctiveness of chaplaincy that I want to share with you today is that chaplains can understand and embody the school's values and the school ethos with depth. I've noticed an observation in a number of schools that even when the staff change, even when head teachers leave, even when there's a change in a trust or a sponsor, it was the chaplain who often carried on and championed the school's ethos, even if no one else did. There was a depth of commitment there that the chaplain championed and embodied the school's ethos, that the chaplain sat in that gap between what there is now and what could be. So much so that chaplains were sometimes perceived as being the school's values, actually being a walking, talking version of the school's ethos. Here's an example of what I've heard a student say. It's like when our chaplain was born, they took all the school values and made him from them. That's so powerful that they actually thought the school's values were part of the chaplain's DNA, part of their makeup. That was the depth to which this chaplain embodied and demonstrated the school's values. The depth which the chaplain offered to that school community was unique and distinctive, and people noticed it. So in summary, what you do and who you are as a chaplain involves a number of things. It's about providing a safe impartiality. It's about offering a distinctive relationship. It's about delivering outrageous peacefulness. It's about holding bold authority, but not that kind of authority. And it's about being a walking, talking, accessible embodiment of the school's values and ethos, so that whatever may come our way, whatever our schools go through, we will not waver, but we will continue to faithfully serve our school communities, collectively and the individuals within it, and love it so deeply that it hurts, and care for it so much that sometimes students in Year 9 think the school values are actually part of our literal DNA. So these are really difficult times, and for a number of us our day-to-day workload may have changed, and the types of things that we're doing may have changed. I hope that instead of defining ourselves by the things we're allowed to do and the things we're not allowed to do, we can actually reframe our understanding of chaplaincy to really lean into what makes us as chaplains distinctive in our work. By embracing what makes us distinctive, hopefully that provides some hope and some encouragement that we're in a really strong position to be hope, to embody hope, and to bring hope to our school communities, wherever we're based. Thank you so much for watching.
We now got the opportunity to ask questions or to follow that up, or to perhaps to give your own examples actually from some of the things that Josh was saying. Just a little reminder, I noticed some people probably writing their own notes. His 5 areas of distinctiveness, he saw them as being that safe impartiality. I guess if you've been working in school in a chaplaincy role or something similar, you may have experienced that with students. A distinctive relationship, that difference that being a chaplain brings. You're a different kind of person in a school, and that gives you all sorts of scope for working with students and staff. That outrageous peacefulness. I loved his example about, have you got a minute? Yes. And you just almost hear the sense of relief that people have when somebody says, yes, I have got a minute for you. Had a holding bold authority. So some of us may be familiar with the idea of the prophetic as part of the role of a chaplain, who that opportunity sometimes to speak truth to power, as they put it, but in a gentle way, but occasionally to be able to just challenge a little bit how things are going or whether things could be different. And then that final thing about embodying the values of the school. Don't know, Paul, whether you've got any insights that you'd like to share on the back of what Josh has said so far.
Hello, everybody. What was that lovely awkward moment when you were asked to speak? I'm interested to see how many of us spend a lot of our time just sitting alongside people, often without the answers, but just that presence and that peaceful presence, and how that feels, how you justify that, how your head is somewhere else looking at the emails, or how you stay focused. How does that feel for people?
I think personally there's definitely a tension with that, the splitting between the admin side to life, working in a school, communicating. So I work in 2 different schools as a chaplain, 1 day each, so it doesn't really feel like enough, if I'm honest. But keeping the admin side of that going whilst being very present to somebody else is tricky. Actually, it's really hard. It's quite a discipline to switch my head off to everything else that's supposed to happen in the day. So I guess really I'd agree that it's obviously tons important, but it is also a tension to figure out as you go along.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else come up with a magic way of dealing with this?
Joel's asked, how do you find the balance in impartiality, not being that religious infiltration? What does that look like? Paul, have you got anything to say about that? And then I can talk a bit about our situation here in Colchester, where we're working only in non-faith schools. So, but Paul, you're in a Woodard school, aren't you?
I'm in a Woodard school that was a state school 11 years ago. I was a governor at that school. I'd worked in the community for years before that, doing community work on behalf of a Christian project. So we involved, as a school, local people to model this Christian faith on the governor level. Then when it became an academy, they wanted a chaplain. That was great news to our local church community. But of course, the parents were a bit nervous. Was it going to be ordained? And what did that mean? And would we have to do communion and be baptized? And what I sought to model was, I knew what the school temperature was like. So I came in at that temperature and didn't try to increase the religiosity temperature too fast. Although over 11 years, introductions of various things like communion once a month has become very popular. So it's very much being the good news, and we all know the saying, and talking about it if asked. but that walking, that the assembly themes that are not a different parable every week, but Black Lives Matter is tomorrow, and we've got that assembly ready for Black History Month. And, you know, there's lots of different issues that we have stories that match, but maybe we don't need to tell those stories from the Bible. We retranslate them and turn them into the issues of the day. And so is it infiltration? Well, I'm one of those, many of us maybe are. Everything's spiritual. So it's just helping people spot what that is, that time that we spend with individuals, helping people be in the now, not in the yesterday or the tomorrow. All of those special moments that we create of getting people to breathe properly and to find peace in their pain. That's infiltration of the spirit, albeit we're living it out.
We're working.
Another question that was asked by Steve. It's kind of in a similar vein, and his question is, what do we bring as distinctively Christian chaplains that is different from general moral or values or citizenship education?
Great question.
Yeah.
Different people's understanding of Christianity, we have to model. All of us sitting on these screens have got our own perspective of how Christianity look and is represented. For me, it's seeing the Christ in other people, seeing the divine in other people. So I'm automatically getting rid of judgmentation and putting people in boxes. I'm trying to find the Christ, the divine within them, because I believe the divine, the Christ is within everybody, as was taught. And so when we're trying to help people discover that, it's by treating them that way. Then people see, wow, you care for everyone. You're not judging anybody. You're listening to everybody. As he said, the LGBT community is a big one issue that many people thought I would have different opinions to what I actually had. And that broke down. I had people from the LGBT community coming to communion because they showed that I cared for that community. You support us, so we'll come and support you in what you're doing. But I'd never preached at them. So it's all about your own personal journey and how you express that. Maybe some are forcing you to be more Christian than you want to be. Maybe you're feeling guilty that you're not being Christian enough. But if we are living out true to our understanding of the gospel, love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself, those, you know, that great commission, mission, the greatest commandment we've been given. So we're working that out by the self-esteem of helping people believe in who they are and love themselves and giving opportunities to look out for other people. And all of that is accidentally or purposefully those moments where they see the divine, they see God, and therefore we have a privilege of explaining it. That's you as an individual out working it, not comparing yourself to another chaplain who's doing it their way.
I think one of the things that I'd say is that there are two components. One is the chaplain and one is the context within which they're working. So it's the school. And so we've got, three of our team are chaplains in two different places. And chaplaincy looks a little bit different in each of those places because those places are different, though the chaplain is the same. In terms of the impartiality, religious infiltration thing, I think all of ours are known as Christian chaplains. We're known as a Christian trust, even though working in non-faith-based schools. So they recognise that we come from a Christian perspective, but we go to serve the whole school community, and they know that as well. And that's evident from the groups, the other groups that we will work with. So in the colleges, in the FE colleges, our chaplain, the lady who works with us, who's the chaplain in those two places, supports the prayer room in the college. So she helps to manage that. And that prayer room is accessible to people of other faiths as well as the Christians. So in a way, there's an act, something that she actually does that reflects that the generosity of being there for all faiths and none. But I think that's a Christian distinctive. I think it is the nature of mission that we go and we embody ourselves within other communities outside of the church and go to serve and support. I think there's something even slightly distinctive about the Christian view of mission and of God active in the world. That place puts us in these places as God's agents of change in whichever community we find ourselves. So, we go into schools with that kind of idea, those sorts of values. We go to serve and support all students. But the fact that we are doing that as Christians seems somehow to help people recognize the Christian faith as having value and values that they like. And I also think that chaplains and chaplaincy can can help to occupy a space that's not easily occupied by others in the school. So that, as Paul said, that spiritual kind of hunger, of that spiritual nature within all people, where is that served well in the school, where it's a massive part of our humanness, and yet there's a big gap in how that is facilitated in schools, and the chaplain slots into that gap, if you like. They're able to enable spiritual life in a school in a way that perhaps points towards God and towards the search of faith, but in a way that perhaps no one else in the school community can. And so we recently ran a remembrance room for students affected by the suicide of one of their peers. Now, I don't know who else in a school would do that, but it became a highly spiritual space for students and for staff to be able to express their memories and their tributes and their thoughts, and also to talk to myself and others staffing that room as a kind of representing a spiritual space in the school. That's a gift that chaplaincy can bring to a school that probably wouldn't come from anywhere else.
Looking at the questions, Joanna's just asked about special measures. The school I work in for 11 years was 4 years in special measures. Very difficult time for staff, a high staff turnover, Ofsted sniffing and breathing down your neck all the time, a real low morale moment for a school. It sounds like you were in and now you're not allowed back in, and a foot back in the door. Well, aside from prayer for that community and reminding that community that you're still there for them, there is the opportunities of volunteering within the school. It links to the next question of lunchtimes are very stressful for staff. We've got the bubbles, and I'm out there in every bubble possible, crossing the bubbles, but supporting with footballs and supporting with conversations and listening. And a lot of the chaplaincy's now gone into the outdoors, or when it's raining indoors. So there is a great opportunity for, in a special measure school, in any school, to say, if I'm already linked and I've got my DBS and you know me, can I come in and help you out at break and lunchtimes? And very few schools would be reluctant, as long as your DBS checked, to not bite your hand off for that opportunity. And then within that, through relationships, you can support.
I love Abby's quote here: awe and wonder, justice and activism, wholeness and inclusion. Yeah, that's really good.
Something that Steve mentioned in the last comment was just about being incarnational.
Yes.
You know, and he also said helpful distinction that we contribute to a general spiritual developmental space rather than specifically Christian.
Yeah, again, it's the individual perspective of the word Christian. And I was brought up in an Elim Pentecostal church, and then I was part of a pioneer network of churches that was trying to save people on the doorsteps and in the community. I'm not judging that, but now I've got to a place where I'm here to listen and serve and care for this community that's wounded and damaged and full of joy and pain, and be Christ into those people. So not many, some teachers are hidden Christians. Some teachers, they know they can't express their Christianity. We've got an opportunity as chaplains to identify with the faith, but retranslate how it's perceived. And very excited. It's just wonderful to be a chaplain. The privilege that we've got to flicker the flame, to drop a little tiny bit of petrol on the flame within each individual that some have gone out, to say you are valued, you are special, you are chosen. Particularly with, as we all know, the self-esteem, the self-harm that many young people are going through. How can we add value to their lives and show that their lives are valued? Any more questions? Just scrolling through there.
Well, looking at the questions, little story from us. So one school where we started chaplaincy a few years ago, the deputy head was tasked with overseeing it. And he was very skeptical to start with. A year later in our review meeting, he said, you may have noticed I was a bit skeptical to start with, but I have to say I'm a convert, although not in the religious sense. And then when that chaplain was ordained, so she was a lay person, and she went through ordination. When she was ordained, he asked her, will you be wearing your dog collar in school? And she went, well, I feel that's kind of up to school whether they're happy with that or not. He said, oh, I think you definitely should. It's part of who you are. And this is a very, very individual story. That won't be everybody's story, but I think it's an example of how somebody who's definitely not somebody of faith, they recognized something about the value and the values of the chaplain that they wanted in their school.
Is anybody aware of the Australian model where they have chaplains in every school as part of their government policy? I've only read about it. I just wonder if anyone's had any experience of it. So you've got a compulsory element to every school must have a chaplain, and so you've got a desire of people to be trained up into that. Would be very interesting. Every school in the country had to have a chaplain, and how that would go down.
Yeah.
Could we serve that need? Do we have enough individuals ready to go in and follow that up? Primary schools where I'm at, they don't have chaplains. They said they're desperate for me to come and support, but of course I'm stretched across. I'm looking all the time how we can train up other individuals.
Yeah, how many chaplains in this group are ordained or not ordained? We've got
hands up ordained. Hands up lay. It's a horrible word, isn't it? Lay chaplain.
Yeah. Lay chaplain. We're all lay chaplain. We're lay chaplaincy, like 6 out of 7 are here are lay chaplains.
I think a good question was also, is ordination a requirement for most schools in chaplaincy?
No. I would say no. Certainly not in our experience here. Being I suppose a youth worker style is probably more what people are looking for. There's been no requirement for ordination, but we are working in non-faith schools, so that might be different.
11 years ago when I was appointed, I was only given a 6-month contract because I wasn't ordained. It was the expected part of the job description as well as having a degree. Didn't have either of those. And after 6 months, they managed, I obviously persuaded them to keep me, and here I still am. And they just this year dropped the word lay chaplain from any of the terminology that goes out to all the other 40 chaplains across the Woodard private schools as well as the academies. And I've never asked for that, but it always felt like second-class citizen type chaplain and ordained. And I think there's a real realization, we're all priests and princesses, or however you want your terminology, we're all priests. And therefore, if some people get hung up on that, it's never been an issue for me personally, but it's interesting now that they've removed that terminology. And now the school's got to remove it, although it's always said chaplain on the door. Just looking at this long question here, pastoral needs. Yes, so resources is an interesting one. I'm producing videos every week for my community, knowing my community, and of course my face, their face. I think you could nick other people's assembly ideas, but you've got to put your face to them because that's your community. That's how I think it works best. You're the relationship they're trying to build up with. You're the individual they will see post-COVID or during COVID if you're privileged to be in there. But just showing a great, well-designed video from a really elite person, it's not as clickly relational. It might be smart and tighter and all moving, but it won't be you. And I think there is so much to be gained by it being you presenting what those 5-10 minute inputs are. So feel free to see what's out there and go on our YouTube channel and see the assemblies we produced, and then steal all of those elements of it, the stories and all the rest of it, but put your face to it would be my suggestion. Michael.
Right. That officially brings us to the end of the time that we've been allowed. Thank you very much, everybody, for being part of this seminar and for your questions, which have been really helpful. A massive thanks to Paul for your wisdom experience into the Q&A. And I wish you well in your work in chaplaincy, and see you online perhaps soon. Thanks very much, everybody.